That plane already landed here 42 years ago, said the air traffic controller, staring in disbelief at the radar. A flight that vanished in 1982 has just returned, untouched by time, with passengers who haven't aged a single day. But what happens after this impossible landing will change everything we thought we knew about time, fate, and reality itself. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Dr. Eliza Warren's mornings followed an unchanging pattern. Coffee at 6:30, NPR's morning news, and a stack of aviation case files that never seemed to get smaller, no matter how hard she worked. Her apartment in downtown Anchorage was more like an archive than a home, with walls covered in aviation maps instead of family photos, and bookshelves stuffed with technical manuals and books about famous plane disappearances. The early spring sunlight peeked through her half-closed blinds while she looked over her notes for today's university class on historical aviation incidents. Eliza had built a decent career studying old plane mysteries, especially those from the Cold War era. Her colleagues respected her thorough work, but kept their distance from her reserved personality. Today, she would be teaching about unexplained disappearances over the Pacific Northwest between 1975 and 1985, including the famous vanishing of Pan Am Flight 612, a case she had written several papers about, but could never quite put behind her. Her home office walls told the story of a lifelong obsession, with timelines and flight patterns of mysterious disappearances everywhere you looked. Most prominent was a map showing the last known location of Flight 612 next to a faded photograph of her father in his male pilot uniform. Though decades had passed, Eliza couldn't help but see a connection between Flight 612's disappearance and her father's final flight. Despite her colleagues insisting she was seeing patterns that weren't really there, she gently touched the worn corner of her father's photo before putting it back in its spot on her meticulously organized desk. Eliza was gathering her teaching materials when her phone rang, unusual for this early hour. Calls before 8 typically meant something important had happened in the aviation world, perhaps a discovery in one of the cold cases she consulted on. She hesitated briefly before answering, expecting maybe a colleague with a question about her upcoming presentation on weird weather patterns and missing aircraft. "Dr. Warren, this is Agent Thomas from the Department of Transportation," said an unfamiliar voice that spoke with careful precision, like someone delivering impossible news. "We need your expertise at Anchorage International immediately. There's a situation that falls directly within your area of study." The agent paused for just a moment, a Lockheed Electra requesting landing clearance under the call sign Flight 612 has just landed. Eliza's hand tightened around her phone. "That's impossible. Flight 612 disappeared in 1982. "Yes, that Flight 612, the agent confirmed. "The one that vanished 42 years ago. We need you here within the hour." The drive to the airport passed in a blur. Eliza's mind raced through everything she knew about Flight 612, the weather conditions during its last transmission, the fruitless search efforts, the conspiracy theories that had followed. None of it prepared her for what she was about to see. As she pulled into the restricted access area where Agent Thomas waited, Eliza noticed the unusually heavy security presence. Government vehicles with different agency logos crowded the tarmac. People in hazmat suits surrounded a distant hangar. Security checkpoints had multiplied overnight. "Everything you're about to see is classified at the highest level," Agent Thomas explained, handing her a confidentiality agreement before she could even take off her coat. He didn't wait for her to finish reading before leading her through a maze of temporary barriers toward Hangar 7. "How is this possible?" Eliza asked, struggling to keep pace with the agent's brisk walk. "That's why you're here, Dr. Warren," he replied without turning around. "To help us figure that out." Nothing in Eliza's extensive career could have prepared her for the sight that waited in Hangar 7, a perfectly preserved Lockheed L-188 Electra with Pan Am's famous blue globe logo. The plane's hull showed only the normal wear of a routine flight. not something that had been missing for 4 decades. Government scientists swarmed around it, taking readings from every angle, while medical personnel processed confused-looking passengers in makeshift screening areas. Security officers maintained a tight perimeter around the whole scene. It appeared on radar exactly 42 years to the day after it vanished, Thomas explained, his voice low. Same flight number, same tail number, same crew manifest. Every passenger who boarded in 1982 is here, and none of them has aged a single day. Eliza approached the aircraft carefully, her trained eye noting all the period-accurate details, from the paint scheme to the tire tread pattern, that would be nearly impossible to fake with such precision. The plane smelled of jet fuel and that strange static charge that hangs in the air after lightning strikes. But nothing suggested it had spent decades somewhere else. When she placed her hand against the metal skin of the plane, she felt momentarily dizzy, as though time itself had compressed around the aircraft, pulling her both forward and backward at once. Among the passengers being processed, Eliza spotted a young girl about 10 years old, clutching a backpack covered in rainbow-bright patches, a perfect piece of early 80s childhood. The girl looked confused like everyone else, but something in her eyes hinted at a deeper understanding, a wisdom that didn't match her age. Agent Thomas noticed Eliza watching her. "That's Anna Morales," he said quietly. "We can't find any living relatives for her. Her parents died 15 years ago, never stopped searching, but eventually had to move on with their lives. Her younger brother is pushing 60 now." As the initial shock began to fade, Eliza found herself drawn to the flight deck where Captain David Mercer sat being questioned by a team of government officials. His crisp Pan Am uniform and calm demeanor seemed strangely out of place amid all the surrounding chaos. When their eyes met across the crowded cabin, something passed between them, a flash of recognition despite never having met before. Later, when she was granted 5 minutes to question him, his first words shook her to her core. "I know your father," he said matter-of-factly. "He showed me a photo of you just before we entered the corridor. He's been waiting a very long time for someone to notice we were gone." Eliza's professional composure cracked. "My father disappeared in 1982. His plane vanished over the Gulf of Alaska." "Not vanished," Mercer corrected gently. "Redirected, just like we were." Over the next 72 hours, Eliza barely left the facility. She reviewed every piece of data collected from the aircraft, searching desperately for connections to her father's disappearance. Sleep-deprived and running on countless cups of terrible coffee, she created a timeline wall in her assigned workspace. Mapping the bizarre overlaps between Flight 612's disappearance coordinates and her father's last known location, the patterns that emerged were too precise to be coincidence. Both aircraft had sent their final signals from within the same 5-mile radius, despite being separated by 4 months in 1982. Eliza was deep in her analysis when a stern-looking woman in a dark suit entered her workspace without knocking. "Dr. Warren, I'm Agent Nora Kim, Department of Homeland Security. I'll be taking over the investigation from this point forward." Her tone left no room for discussion as she surveyed Eliza's work with critical eyes. "I understand you have a personal connection to this case. If you're referring to my father's disappearance, I'm referring to your obsession with it," Kim interrupted, removing several of Eliza's notes from the evidence board. "Your father's disappearance has compromised your objectivity. This investigation requires scientific distance, not personal vendettas." "With all due respect, Agent Kim," Eliza replied, struggling to keep her voice even, "my background with these cases is precisely why I was brought in." Kim's expression remained unmoved. "You were brought in for your expertise, not your emotions. If you can't separate yourself from this, you'll be removed from the project." As Kim walked away, Eliza noticed Captain Mercer watching from across the room, his eyes communicating a silent message. "They don't understand what we're dealing with. Not yet." Captain Mercer became Eliza's unexpected ally in the days that followed. During their authorized interview sessions, he described seeing her father in what he called the place between, a realm of distorted light and stretched time where people communicated without speaking. He was older there. Mercer explained, sketching unusual symbols on a notepad that matched markings Eliza recognized from her father's old flight journals. He said he chose to stay because someone needed to understand how it worked. He called it the breach. These sessions were frequently interrupted by Dr. Rafiq Salim, the quantum physicist assigned to the case. Salim's interest in Mercer's descriptions bordered on obsession, his questions becoming increasingly technical with each interview. "These patterns you're drawing," Salim said during one session, pointing to Mercer's sketches, "they're remarkably similar to theoretical models of space-time distortion under extreme gravitational conditions." "I'm just drawing what I saw," Mercer replied simply. Between debriefing sessions, Anna Morales began seeking out Eliza. The young passenger, technically in her 50s, but physically still 10, seemed drawn to Eliza's presence. Anna's drawings depicted strange geometric patterns that matched both Mercer's sketches and the symbols in Eliza's father's notebook. "The sky had two colors there," Anna explained, while coloring with government-issued crayons. "And sometimes we could see through the floor of the plane, like we were everywhere and nowhere at once." When Eliza showed Anna a photo of her father, the girl's reaction was immediate and startling. She dropped her crayon and whispered, "He's the one who told us we had to come back. He said his daughter would know what to do when it starts happening again." Despite Agent Kim's increasingly restrictive protocols, Eliza managed to secure temporary access to the passengers' personal effects recovered from the aircraft. Each item told the same impossible story. Newspapers dated July 1982, unwrapped candy with packaging designs discontinued decades ago, boarding passes printed the day of the original flight. Everything was perfectly preserved, as though time simply hadn't touched them. Driven by these connections, Eliza formally requested access to classified files on temporal anomalies reported in Alaska's airspace. Since the 1950s, Agent Kim predictably denied the request with a terse note about maintaining investigation focus, but Dr. Salim secretly approached Eliza that evening in the facility cafeteria. "There's a location you should know about," he said quietly, sliding a napkin with coordinates across the table. "Laakami Ridge in Colorado. Similar incidents have been documented there by indigenous peoples long before modern aviation. My colleague at DARPA believes these events may be connected." "You're risking your position by telling me this," Eliza noted, memorizing the coordinates before returning the napkin. Salim smiled thinly. "Science demands risk, Dr. Warren. There are more flights like 612. The government has been studying them for decades." He glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. "Your father wasn't the first pilot to find the breach, but he might have been the first to understand what it actually was, a door that swings both ways." That night, Eliza discovered her security clearance had been downgraded, restricting her access to several key areas of the facility. When she confronted Agent Kim the next morning, the answer was predictably bureaucratic. "This investigation is entering a classified phase that requires compartmentalization," Kim explained without looking up from her tablet. "Your expertise has been noted, but your continued involvement presents certain security concerns." "You mean my connection to my father?" Eliza challenged. Kim finally looked up. "I mean your willingness to pursue unauthorized avenues of investigation. We've noted your conversations with Dr. Salim." Despite these obstacles, Eliza continued her work, focusing on the connections between Flight 612's disappearance coordinates and the unusual patterns appearing in both Mercer's sketches and Anna's drawings. Working late one night after most staff had left, she managed to access the original flight recorder data from 612, something that had been mysteriously absent from the materials provided to her. The recording contained mostly routine communications until the final moments before disappearance. Then, buried beneath layers of static, Eliza discovered something extraordinary, a sequence of tones matching the exact frequency pattern Dr. Salim had described in his theoretical models of space-time distortion. More shocking was a barely audible voice in the background that Eliza would have recognized anywhere, her father, saying coordinates that matched Lakami Ridge. By morning, Eliza had made her decision. She would need to get to Colorado, with or without official authorization. The answer she sought wouldn't be found in government facilities where information was controlled and compartmentalized. They waited at Lakami Ridge, where her father had somehow understood something important enough to risk everything. Getting away required calling in every professional favor Eliza had accumulated over her career. She fabricated a conference presentation as cover for her absence and boarded a commercial flight to Denver with the growing feeling that she was crossing a line she couldn't step back from. The remote Colorado location demanded a 4-hour drive through increasingly isolated mountain terrain. Her rental car's GPS signal began to fail as she approached coordinates that didn't appear on any official map. The landscape itself seemed to push against her presence. Unexpected road closures forced detours, her equipment suffered mysterious electrical failures, and a disorienting fog appeared despite clear weather forecasts. Just when Eliza considered turning back, Lakami Ridge emerged from the mist like something from another world, a jagged outcropping of dark stone that local legends claimed changed location during certain astronomical alignments. The indigenous Ute people had called it the place where sky touches earth and avoided building permanent settlements nearby despite the area's natural resources. Eliza hiked the unmarked trail with her father's journal in hand, matching his decades-old sketches to landmarks that seemed untouched by time or weather. At the summit, she found what generations of locals had documented but scientific authorities had dismissed: perfectly circular clearings where nothing grew, arranged in a pattern identical to the one Captain Mercer had drawn from memory. The discovery of a small, half-buried research station nestled in the ridge's northern face sent a chill through Eliza that had nothing to do with the mountain air. The facility bore no government markings, yet the sophisticated equipment inside, much of it dating back to the early 80s, suggested serious funding and purpose. Dust-covered logbooks detailed observations of temporal flux events spanning decades, with her father's distinctive handwriting appearing in entries from June 1982, 1 month before Flight 612 disappeared. His final entry read simply, "Breakthrough achieved. The corridor can be navigated." Voluntary passage requires a precise electromagnetic signature. Involuntary passage appears random but may correlate with emotional intensity of subjects. Eliza was photographing these records when an unexpected earthquake shook the station, geologically impossible according to everything known about the region. As the tremors intensified, the circular clearings began emitting a low-frequency hum that matched recordings from Flight 612's black box. Her equipment registered massive electromagnetic spikes that formed a pattern identical to the one Anna had drawn. For 17 seconds, Eliza experienced what she could only describe later as time stretching. Birds froze mid-flight, dust particles hung suspended in air, and her own heartbeat slowed to an impossible rhythm. When reality snapped back to normal, she found herself holding a small metal plate that hadn't been there before, etched with coordinates and a single date: tomorrow. The return to Anchorage felt like moving through a dream. Her phone exploded with missed calls from the research facility as soon as she regained signal. Agent Kim's voicemail message was clipped but urgent. "Return immediately. The plane is changing, and so are the passengers." Eliza arrived to find the facility in controlled chaos. Within hours of her discovery at Lakami Ridge, Flight 612's passengers had begun experiencing accelerated aging, with physical symptoms appearing at different rates with no discernible pattern. Anna remained strangely unaffected, but Captain Mercer had developed advanced cataracts overnight, while other passengers reported joint pain and memory distortions that included recollections of lives they never lived. It started exactly 17 seconds after 3 p.m., Dr. Salim explained, checking data on multiple screens. The exact moment you described experiencing the time distortion at Lakami Ridge. He pointed to a graph showing energy readings from the aircraft. Whatever connection exists between these locations, you activated something when you found that facility. Agent Kim was waiting in Eliza's workspace, her usual composure visibly strained. "You left the facility against explicit instructions," she stated flatly. "I found evidence that my father was conducting research at Lakami Ridge just before Flight 612 disappeared," Eliza replied, placing the metal plate on the desk between them. "And I found this." Kim's expression changed as she examined the object. "This alloy shouldn't exist," she said finally, looking up with newfound respect. "It contains elements and configurations our metallurgists say are theoretically impossible." "That's because it's not from our timeline," Dr. Salim interjected from the doorway, his excitement overriding protocol. "The metal plate's atomic structure shows quantum positioning we've only theorized. It's simultaneously present and not present at the subatomic level." For the first time since the investigation began, Agent Kim seemed to truly listen as Eliza outlined everything she'd discovered: the connection between Lakami Ridge and Flight 612, her father's research, and the possibility that what they were witnessing wasn't just about a missing airplane, but about intersections between different timelines. "If I'm right," Eliza concluded, "then the passengers' accelerated aging isn't random at all. They're experiencing time catching up to them as the effect that preserved them begins to break down. And if we don't understand how to stabilize it soon, we could lose them completely." That night, working with newfound authorization, Eliza and Dr. Salim began a systematic analysis of both the aircraft and the metal plate, searching for the mechanism that had somehow preserved 92 people outside normal time flow for over 4 decades. What they didn't yet realize was that Flight 612 wasn't just a mystery to be solved. It was a message sent across time. And the metal plate in their possession was the key to understanding what would happen next. 5 months into the investigation, a routine structural analysis of Flight 612 revealed something impossible: a hidden compartment in the cargo hold that didn't appear in any of the aircraft's original blueprints. The discovery happened during a period of increasing temporal disturbances around the hangar, with instruments recording tiny variations in how time passed depending on how close they were to the aircraft. "The compartment is sealed with some kind of alloy," the technician explained, showing Eliza and Dr. Salim the scan results. "It's the same material as that plate you found at Lakami Ridge. Our regular cutting tools can't even scratch it. It took 3 days to develop equipment that could access the hidden space, the metal seemingly resistant to conventional methods, as though time itself flowed differently within its atomic structure. When they finally opened the chamber, what they found inside sent shockwaves through the entire research team, a collection of artifacts spanning multiple decades, some clearly made before the aircraft's 1982 disappearance, and others bearing manufacturing dates from years that hadn't happened yet. Among these objects, Eliza found a watch with her father's initials, its mechanics working perfectly despite showing a date 7 years in the future. More disturbing were the detailed journals documenting multiple passages through what the writer, unmistakably her father, called breach points in the space-time continuum. Each entry describing increasingly precise methods for navigating these temporal corridors. He wasn't just trapped by the phenomenon, Eliza realized, carefully turning the journal pages. He was studying it, learning to control it. Agent Kim's reaction to these discoveries was swift and severe. She ordered the entire facility locked down and implemented new security protocols that effectively isolated the research team from outside contact. "This is no longer just about a missing aircraft," she informed them during a tense briefing. "We're dealing with a fundamental breach in the nature of reality, with implications for national security that go beyond anything in our established protocols." Eliza found herself under constant surveillance, her access to Anna and Captain Mercer restricted, as both were moved to a specialized medical facility after showing what government physicians described as timeline displacement syndrome. Despite these obstacles, Dr. Salim became Eliza's most valuable ally, his scientific curiosity overriding his institutional loyalty. Together, they established a secret research initiative, using equipment smuggled from the main lab to analyze the electromagnetic signatures emitting from both the aircraft and the artifacts. Their findings suggested a connection between emotional states and temporal stability. Strong emotional connections seemed to anchor objects and people within specific timelines, potentially explaining why Anna remained physically stable while adult passengers experienced accelerated aging. "Children naturally exist in a state of potential," Salim explained late one night in their makeshift lab. "Their neural pathways are still forming. Their understanding of time isn't as rigid as adults. It makes them more adaptable to timeline shifts." The real breakthrough came when Eliza connected her father's journals to ancient Tlingit legends about Skywalkers who could move between worlds. The indigenous stories described specific rituals performed during solstices to realign the paths between worlds, ceremonies involving fire that closely resembled the spring solstice firewalk still practiced in remote Alaskan communities. When she overlaid the locations of these traditional ceremonies with reported aviation anomalies, a pattern emerged that matched perfectly with the coordinates her father had documented. He wasn't just finding these breach points, she explained to a visibly shaken Dr. Salim. He was learning how to create them, using principles that indigenous people have understood for centuries, but our science is only beginning to grasp. This revelation coincided with Captain Mercer's condition stabilizing enough for brief conversation. During one authorized visit, he confided something that changed everything Eliza thought she understood about the situation. "The corridor doesn't just connect different points in time," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It connects different versions of the same moments, parallel timelines that split off from each other whenever a significant choice is made." He gripped her hand with surprising strength. "Your father showed me how certain objects can serve as anchors between timelines, physical connections that allow passage in both directions." "Like the watch?" Eliza asked. Mercer nodded. "And the plane itself. It was specifically chosen because it had already disappeared in the historical record. The perfect vehicle for moving between timelines without creating paradoxes." His eyes, cloudy with cataracts, somehow still conveyed urgency. "But the corridor is becoming unstable. We weren't supposed to stay this long in your timeline. There are consequences to remaining outside your original timeline, consequences we're just beginning to experience." That night, reviewing everything they'd learned, Eliza realized the hidden chamber wasn't just storage for temporal artifacts. It was a message, carefully assembled by her father across multiple timeline jumps, designed to provide exactly the information needed when Flight 612 eventually returned. The question wasn't why the plane had disappeared in 1982, but why it had chosen to return now, in 2024. The answer came the next morning, in the form of a small notebook hidden inside her father's watch case. A detailed timeline of events leading to what he called the Cascade failure, scheduled to occur in February 2025, less than 9 months away. The final page contained a single sentence that made Eliza's blood run cold. "If Flight 612 returns as calculated, You'll have one chance to prevent the breach from becoming permanent. The morning of October 17th brought an unprecedented development, a visible distortion in the air above Hangar 7, described by witnesses as a fold in the sky. Instruments across the facility malfunctioned at the same time, recording time signatures that jumped between past, present, and future states. Military personnel quickly established a wider security perimeter. As scientists documented the phenomenon, a shimmering vertical rift about 20 feet tall that bent light around its edges while emitting the same frequency they had discovered in the aircraft's avionics. Eliza, watching from behind the security line, immediately recognized the phenomenon from her father's drawings, labeled Primary Breach Manifestation. With Agent Kim focused on containment protocols, Eliza seized the opportunity to implement the theoretical approach she and Dr. Salim had developed in secret. Using modified equipment calibrated to the specific electromagnetic frequency emitted by the artifacts, they established a basic communication method with the rift itself, sending simple patterns and receiving complex responses that matched sequences found in her father's notes. "It's not random," she explained to a skeptical security team as data flowed across their monitors. "There's intelligence directing these responses. Something or someone is trying to establish contact from the other side." The breakthrough that stunned everyone came when they synchronized the black box recordings with the rift's emissions, creating a composite audio feed that contained recognizable human voices, including one Eliza identified immediately as her father's. Though distorted and fragmented, the message was clear enough. The corridor is becoming unstable. Multiple timeline convergence imminent. The children must return first. This communication coincided with a worrying deterioration in the adult passengers' conditions, as their cellular structures began showing signs of existing simultaneously in different states of decay and renewal, something the medical team had never seen before and had no way to treat. Meanwhile, Anna's role shifted from passive subject to active participant when she revealed her ability to sense the rift's fluctuations before instruments could detect them. Under careful monitoring, the child demonstrated an uncanny awareness of temporal shifts, accurately predicting disturbances minutes before they registered on equipment. "I can hear them talking on the other side," she explained with childlike simplicity. "They say we're running out of time because the door won't stay open much longer. The captain knows this too, but he's afraid to tell you because he doesn't belong here either." This statement created immediate tension in the room. All eyes turned to Captain Mercer, who had been quietly observing from his wheelchair. Under the weight of their collective stares, his carefully maintained composure finally cracked. "It's time they knew," he said to Anna, before turning to address the research team. "I'm not from 1982 at all, but from 2024, part of a classified experiment involving the recreation of Flight 612 using data recovered from Lakami Ridge." The room fell into stunned silence as Mercer continued his confession, his face showing the strain of carrying two sets of memories for months. "We were sent back," he explained during the emergency debriefing that followed. "A team of scientists found a way to generate a controlled breach using the electromagnetic signatures recorded at previous incident sites. I volunteered because my grandfather was one of the original passengers." "You're saying you deliberately entered the breach?" Agent Kim asked, her voice tight with controlled anger. Mercer nodded. "We were supposed to document the corridor and return immediately, but something went wrong. Instead of minutes, we spent what felt like hours in the breach and emerged here, now, with the original passengers somehow merged with our experimental flight." This revelation explains so much: why the aircraft contained both period-accurate components and materials that shouldn't exist yet, why Mercer seemed to have knowledge no 1982 pilot could possess, and why his condition had stabilized while other adult passengers continued to deteriorate. The original plan was to prove that controlled temporal navigation was possible, Mercer continued. There's an entire research division working on applications for breach technology. Military, civilian, scientific. The potential seemed unlimited. Until something went wrong, Eliza added. Until everything went wrong, Mercer corrected. What we didn't understand, what nobody understood except your father, was that each breach weakens the boundaries between timelines. The more we use the technology, the more unstable the corridors became. Dr. Salim, who had been analyzing data throughout Mercer's confession, suddenly called for attention. The rift is expanding, he announced, pointing to real-time measurements, and it's emitting a pattern identical to readings taken during Flight 612's original disappearance. On the monitors, the shimmering distortion above the facility had indeed grown visibly larger, its edges pulsing with increasing energy. More alarming were the smaller distortions now appearing at various points around the hangar. Miniature rifts that winked in and out of existence like temporal echoes. It's starting, Anna said quietly, her eyes fixed on something no one else could see. The cascade your father warned about. When one breach becomes many, and time stops being a straight line. As if to confirm her words, the lights throughout the facility flickered, and for 3 seconds, everyone experienced the same temporal distortion Eliza had felt at Lakami Ridge. That strange stretching of reality, where moments extended beyond their natural length. When normal time resumed, a collective gasp rose from the research team. Through the hangar windows, they could see the night sky above Anchorage, filled with curtains of light that resembled the aurora borealis, but moved with unnatural precision, forming and reforming into patterns that matched exactly the symbols in Mercer's sketches, Anna's drawings, and Robert Warren's journals. We're out of time, Mercer said softly. The breach is no longer just connecting our timelines. It's merging them. The revelation of Mercer's true origins created deep divisions within the research team. Agent Kim immediately advocated for his isolation, calling him a security threat, while Dr. Salim argued for increased collaboration with the captain, whose unique perspective might be crucial to understanding what they were facing. Eliza found herself positioned between these competing interests, recognizing that Mercer's disclosure connected decades of seemingly random events into a coherent pattern. The aircraft itself now appeared to be a temporal hybrid, physically from 1982, but containing components that weren't developed until decades later, suggesting a merging of multiple timeline versions of the same flight. This discovery coincided with increasing stability in the rift, which maintained a constant presence above the facility, visible only through specialized equipment, but measurably affecting the surrounding environment. Through Dr. Salim's help, Eliza gained access to her father's complete journals from the classified database. What she found transformed her understanding of his disappearance. Rather than a victim of circumstance, Robert Warren had been the lead scientist on Project Threshold, a classified initiative studying temporal anomalies occurring naturally since at least the 1940s. His discovery that these anomalies could be artificially generated under specific conditions led to experimental flights near known breach points, culminating in his decision to pilot a test aircraft himself when calculated risks proved too high for military volunteers. He didn't disappear, Eliza explained during a tense briefing with senior officials. He chose to enter the breach, to understand it from within, knowing it might be a one-way journey. The accelerated aging affecting adult passengers stabilized when they were positioned near items from the hidden chamber, suggesting these artifacts served as temporal anchors. Using this principle, Eliza and Dr. Salim developed a theoretical framework for returning passengers to their original timeline through the active rift, with Captain Mercer's dual timeline memories providing crucial navigation parameters. Agent Kim reluctantly authorized a controlled test using non-living matter, which successfully transmitted through the rift and returned altered but intact, bearing energy signatures matching those found in the aircraft's hidden chamber. For the first time since Flight 612's impossible landing, a path forward seemed clear, a way to resolve the temporal displacement before it caused catastrophic consequences. Anna's central role in the planned return became evident when instruments detected unique resonance patterns between her bioelectric field and the rift's fluctuations. "She's a natural conductor," Dr. Salim explained, possibly because children's neural pathways are still forming, making them more adaptable to temporal shifts. With careful ethical considerations, Anna participated in calibration tests, her presence stabilizing the rift enough to potentially allow for controlled passage. The night before the first scheduled human test, using a volunteer from the research team, Eliza spent hours with Anna, answering her questions about what might wait on the other side and promising to find a way for her to reconnect with her now elderly family. "If we can make this work," Eliza told her, "you might have a choice about where and when you want to be." Anna looked up from the drawing she was working on. Another depiction of the rift, but this time showing figures passing through it in both directions. "I don't think we get to choose," she said, with that uncanny wisdom that made her seem so much older than 10. "Some people belong in certain times. Your dad knows that. That's why he stayed where he did." Before Eliza could ask what she meant, Anna changed the subject, asking for more colored pencils to finish her drawing. When Eliza checked on her later that evening, the child was sleeping peacefully, the completed drawing resting on her nightstand. The carefully orchestrated plans collapsed in the early hours of the following morning, when security alarms triggered throughout the facility. Anna had vanished from her monitored room, leaving behind only her drawing of the rift. Simultaneous with her disappearance, the rift exhibited unprecedented expansion, nearly doubling in size while emitting energy signatures that matched exactly those recorded during Flight 612's original disappearance. Captain Mercer, upon learning of Anna's disappearance, broke containment protocols to access the aircraft, claiming she must have sought shelter in the hidden chamber. When Eliza reached the hangar, she found him in the pilot's seat, the engines inexplicably operational despite having been disabled months earlier. She knew, he told Eliza through the cockpit window, his expression a mixture of fear and resignation. Anna understood before any of us that this was never about returning to 1982. It's about preventing something that happens in 2025, something your father discovered and tried to stop by creating the first breach. "What happens in 2025? Eliza demanded, even as security personnel surrounded the aircraft. "The military demonstration of controlled temporal exclusion technology," Mercer replied. "The culmination of decades of research into weaponizing the breach. In my original timeline, that demonstration created a cascading failure that eventually collapsed multiple realities into a temporal war nobody could win." His eyes met hers with desperate intensity. "Your father sent us here, sent me here, to make sure that demonstration never happens. And Anna is the key." Before Eliza could respond, the temporal rift above the facility pulsed with blinding light. Every electronic device in the hangar failed simultaneously, as a wave of distortion rippled through the physical structure of the building itself. When emergency systems came back online 30 seconds later, both Anna and the aircraft had vanished from the hangar, leaving behind only tire marks and a heat signature embedded in the concrete floor. Agent Kim arrived minutes later, her usual composure shattered by what their instruments had recorded. "The rift's energy signature just multiplied by a factor of 10, she said, staring at the empty space where the aircraft had been. "And we're picking up similar signatures at 12 different locations around the globe." "It's starting," Eliza realized. "The cascade failure Mercer mentioned, the very thing my father has been trying to prevent for 40 years. "What do we do?" Dr. Salim asked, the scientific detachment he'd maintained throughout the investigation, finally giving way to genuine fear. Eliza looked down at Anna's drawing, which she'd picked up during the chaos. In the corner, almost too small to notice, the child had written a set of coordinates and a time. Lakami Ridge, tomorrow at dawn. The chaos following Anna's disappearance and Mercer's attempted flight activation forced a complete reassessment of the investigation. With the rift continuing to expand and instrument readings suggesting imminent temporal instability throughout the region, Agent Kim finally granted Eliza unrestricted access to all classified files related to Project Threshold. The complete archives revealed decades of government research into temporal anomalies, including documented cases of objects and people appearing years or even decades out of their time, most cataloged as classified aviation incidents to avoid public panic. Among these records, Eliza discovered the truth she'd sought for decades. Her father hadn't disappeared at all, but had been extracted from normal timeline flow and recruited to study the very phenomenon that had temporarily removed him from existence. He volunteered, explained Dr. Harmon, an elderly physicist who had been part of the original Project Threshold team. After his first accidental encounter with a breach, he became convinced that these temporal anomalies weren't random, but formed a pattern, one that could be studied and potentially controlled. He saw it as the most important scientific frontier of our time. Armed with complete information and facing escalating temporal disruptions around the facility, Eliza proposed a high-risk expedition to Lakami Ridge with Dr. Salim. Her theory, based on patterns in the compiled data, suggested the Colorado location served as a central node in a network of temporal breach points, a place where the barriers between timelines were naturally thinner and could be manipulated with the right approach. Agent Kim authorized the mission not out of scientific curiosity, but pragmatic necessity, as predictive models showed catastrophic timeline contamination if the expanding rift remained unaddressed. Find a way to close it, Kim instructed during the mission briefing, or at least stabilize it enough that we can move it away from populated areas. The team arrived at Lakami Ridge to find the landscape dramatically transformed from Eliza's previous visit. The circular clearings now pulsed with visible energy that corresponded precisely to the rift's fluctuations in Alaska, suggesting a direct connection between locations. More striking was the discovery of a sophisticated research facility embedded within the ridge itself, one significantly more advanced than the abandoned station Eliza had found months earlier. According to local timestamps, the facility had been operational continuously since 1984, staffed by scientists working under the direction of Robert Warren, who appeared in security footage looking exactly as he did on the day of his disappearance. Despite the decades that had passed, it's as if he exists in a different time stream that occasionally intersects with ours, Dr. Salim observed, studying the footage closely. Based on the journal entries we've seen, he's been able to move between timeline branches while maintaining his original temporal signature. The facility's central chamber contained equipment that defied contemporary understanding, a circular array of devices that generated a controlled miniature version of the temporal rift. Here, among technology that seemed decades ahead of its time, they found Anna calmly waiting for them. "I had to come first to prepare the way," she explained with the peculiar clarity she'd displayed throughout the investigation. "Your father said the breach needs a guide on both sides to remain stable, someone who can exist in multiple times simultaneously. That's why he stayed in 1984 and why he sent me to bring you here now." The child led them to a sealed room where temporal distortions were visibly stronger, the air shimmering with the same golden light that surrounded the aircraft in Anchorage. Inside this inner sanctum, Robert Warren himself awaited, physically no older than the day he disappeared, but with eyes that reflected decades of accumulated knowledge. The reunion between father and daughter was brief but profound, a moment outside the normal flow of time where explanations became secondary to the simple fact of reconnection. "I'm sorry for leaving without explanation," he told Eliza, "but there was no way to describe what I'd discovered without showing you directly." He activated a holographic display showing Earth surrounded by overlapping temporal fields, areas where multiple timeline versions of reality intersected and occasionally breached into one another. Flight 612 wasn't an accident, he explained. It was the first successful test of controlled temporal displacement, a technology that would eventually lead to the catastrophic event scheduled for February 2025, when an attempt to weaponize these breaches will create a cascade failure across all connected timelines. "So you've been working to prevent this?" Eliza asked, struggling to process both the scientific implications and the emotional reality of seeing her father again after 40 years. "From within the breach, I can observe multiple timeline branches simultaneously," Robert replied. "I've seen versions where the February event succeeds in isolating temporal zones for military applications, only to trigger unforeseen consequences that eventually destabilize all connected realities. And I've seen versions where it fails catastrophically, creating uncontrolled rifts that allow temporal energy to flow unchecked between periods." "Like what's happening now, Doctor?" Salim interjected, showing readings from his portable equipment. "The rifts we're detecting globally are growing exponentially." Robert nodded grimly. "The breaches are becoming self-sustaining. Each one creates temporal distortions that increase the probability of new breaches forming, creating a feedback loop that eventually leads to total timeline collapse." "How do we stop it?" Eliza asked. "We can't stop it entirely," her father admitted, "but we can redirect it." The original flight, the 1982 Flight 612 that disappeared, was meant to be a one-time proof of concept. But when military applications became the focus, I realized we needed to create a more significant anomaly, one that couldn't be hidden or explained away. "So you arranged for Flight 612 to return in 2024, Eliza realized. "With passengers who hadn't aged a day, creating a temporal event too big to cover up?" "Exactly. An anomaly significant enough to force governmental transparency about Project Threshold while providing irrefutable evidence of the technology's dangers." Robert turned to Anna with a gentle smile. "With help from some uniquely gifted individuals who can move between timelines without losing their temporal coherence." "The children," Eliza whispered, remembering Mercer's words. "That's why Anna isn't affected like the adult passengers. Children naturally exist in a state of quantum potential," Robert confirmed. "Their neural pathways are still forming. Their understanding of time isn't as rigid as adults. It makes them perfect temporal conductors." Alarms sounded from the monitoring equipment. On the displays, the network of rifts pulsed in synchronized patterns, growing more intense with each cycle. "We're running out of time," Robert said urgently. "The breach network is approaching critical resonance. If we don't stabilize it soon, the cascade will become irreversible." Robert Warren's explanation of the impending February 2025 event unfolded through a series of holographic projections showing increasingly destabilized timeline intersections. What began as naturally occurring anomalies had been systematically studied and eventually weaponized through decades of classified research, with Flight 612's original disappearance serving as proof of concept for technology that could remove targeted locations from normal temporal flow. "Imagine being able to isolate a city within its own temporal bubble," he explained, manipulating the display to show a simulated demonstration. "Where minutes inside might equal decades outside, the perfect containment for anything deemed too dangerous or valuable to exist in conventional time." The culmination of this research, scheduled for implementation in February 2025, involved the creation of a controlled temporal exclusion zone around a major research facility. A test with consequences that would ripple backward and forward through connected timelines. "The problem isn't the technology itself," Robert continued, "but our fundamental misunderstanding of how temporal fields interact. We assumed each timeline was discrete and separate, when in reality, they're all connected through what physicists call quantum entanglement. Disturb one timeline significantly enough, and you create ripple effects across all connected branches." The Temporal Mechanics Laboratory at Lacomi Ridge represented 40 years of Robert Warren's work from within a timeline branch where he'd established an independent research initiative outside governmental control. I needed to understand the breach mechanics well enough to prevent their weaponization, he explained, while guiding them through equipment that monitored temporal stability across multiple locations simultaneously. Flight 612 presented the perfect opportunity, an incident already documented in the timeline where interference would create minimal disruption. His plan had involved intercepting the 1982 flight as it cast near a natural breach point, redirecting it into a controlled temporal corridor that would eventually return it to 2024, creating a documented anomaly significant enough to force governmental transparency about Project Threshold while providing evidence of the technology's dangers. Captain Mercer's role became clear as Robert revealed the complex layers of his intervention. The captain wasn't simply from 2024, but from a timeline branch where the catastrophic February event had already occurred, creating temporal rifts that eventually collapsed multiple reality versions. He volunteered because he'd already seen the consequences, Robert explained. In his original timeline, the experiment failed catastrophically, creating uncontrolled rifts that allowed temporal energy to flow unchecked between periods. He came back to help ensure the passengers returned at exactly the right moment to prevent the authorization of the final test. This revelation explained Mercer's contradictory memories and his deteriorating physical condition. He existed simultaneously in multiple timeline versions, his cellular structure struggling to maintain coherence within a single temporal flow. The true significance of Anna's unique stability emerged through Robert's explanation of temporal conductance, the capacity for certain individuals to move between timeline branches while maintaining physical and psychological integrity. Children naturally exist in a state of quantum potentiality, he explained, their neural pathways and cellular structures still flexible enough to adapt to timeline shifts without degradation. Anna's role had never been that of an ordinary passenger, but of a specialized temporal conductor, one of several children selected from across multiple timeline versions for their natural resilience to temporal displacement. She was our anchor point, Robert explained, ensuring that Flight 612 maintained cohesion during its journey through the corridor, and later serving as the beacon that guided its return to precisely the right moment in 2024. Eliza's lifetime of research into aviation anomalies took on profound new meaning as she recognized her own unwitting role in her father's grand intervention. You ensured I would focus my career on these specific incidents, she realized, the pattern of her professional development suddenly appearing as the carefully constructed path it had always been. Every research grant, every consulting position with just the right agencies, you were positioning me to be present when Flight 612 returned. Robert didn't deny this orchestration, but offered a perspective that transcended manipulation. I needed someone who could interpret the evidence correctly, someone whose mind would make the connections others would miss. But more importantly, I needed someone with the emotional investment to persist when institutional forces inevitably tried to suppress the truth. Your search for me ensured you would never stop searching for answers about Flight 612. As Eliza processed these revelations, alarm signals sounded from the monitoring equipment. The network display showed new rifts forming at an accelerating rate, each one triggering others in a cascade effect that matched Robert's predictions. The breach network is approaching critical resonance, he announced. We have less than 48 hours before the cascade becomes irreversible. How do we stop it? Dr. Salim asked. We can't stop it completely, Robert replied, but we can redirect it. The temporal energy needs to flow somewhere, and the safest path is back to its point of origin, the 1982 breach that first involved Flight 612. You're talking about returning the plane to 1982, Eliza said slowly, undoing its appearance in 2024. Yes, by returning the aircraft and its passengers to their original departure point, we create a closed temporal loop, one that satisfies the quantum requirements without triggering further breaches. But that would mean erasing the past 8 months, Dr. Salim objected. Everything that's happened since the plane landed in Anchorage, would any of it still exist? Time protects itself in ways we're only beginning to understand, Robert answered. The events themselves might be altered, but their effects on the underlying timeline structure would remain, like the imprint left by a wave on the shore even after the water recedes. Eliza realized the full implications of what her father was proposing. If we succeed and Flight 612 returns to 1982, what happens to you and to Anna? Robert's expression softened. Anna will return with the flight. Her unique temporal signature will help guide it back to its correct origin point. As for me, he hesitated. I've existed outside conventional time for too long to simply step back into it. My work must continue from within the breach, monitoring the network and helping maintain balance between connected timelines. You're asking me to lose you again, Eliza said quietly. Her father took her hands in his. I know it's an impossible choice, but we're facing the collapse of not just our timeline, but all connected realities. Millions of lives across multiple timeline branches depend on what we do in the next 48 hours. The weight of this responsibility settled over the room as the monitoring equipment continued to track the growing network of temporal breaches. Anna, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. It's not about choosing, she said with that wisdom that seemed far beyond her years. It's about understanding where we truly belong. Some people are meant to be bridges between worlds, even if it means not fully existing in any single one. Robert nodded in agreement. The question isn't whether we should return Flight 612 to 1982, but how to ensure it arrives at precisely the right moment to close the original breach without creating new ones. As they began planning the complex temporal navigation required, Eliza found herself studying her father's face, unchanged after 4 decades, while she had grown from child to adult in his absence. She realized that regardless of the outcome, she had finally found the answers she'd sought her entire life. Whether those answers would exist tomorrow remained to be seen. The revelations at Lacomi Ridge triggered a cascade of temporal disturbances across connected sites, with the Anchorage facility reporting unprecedented fluctuations in the main rift's stability. Dr. Salim's monitoring equipment captured the ripple effect spreading outward from both locations, a phenomenon Robert identified as temporal resonance, where actions in one timeline branch created corresponding fluctuations in connected branches. The passengers of Flight 612, still held in medical containment, began experiencing synchronized neurological patterns that matched the frequency emissions from the expanding rifts. They're becoming synchronized with the breach, Robert explained through the secure communication link established between facilities. Their extended exposure to the corridor has fundamentally altered their quantum signatures. They're no longer fully anchored to any single timeline. Agent Kim's response to these developments reflected the institutional panic spreading through government agencies as the situation outpaced containment protocols. Security around the Anchorage facility intensified as military personnel established a 10-mile exclusion zone, ostensibly for public safety, but effectively isolating the researchers from outside communication. When Eliza attempted to transmit her father's warning about the February event through official channels, she discovered their secure communications. They're implementing protocol blackout, Robert warned when informed of these measures. It's the first stage of temporal containment, isolating all knowledge of the anomaly within a controlled perimeter while they prepare more permanent solutions. The personal cost of these revelations weighed heavily on Eliza as she confronted the full implications of her father's choices. Despite the joy of reunion, she couldn't reconcile the decades of absence with the mission he had prioritized over family. "You let me believe you were dead," she confronted him during a rare private moment in the facility's observation deck. The mountain landscape stretching beyond windows that subtly distorted with temporal fluctuations. "You watched me search for answers my entire life without once reaching out." Robert's response offered no justification, only context. From within the breach, time flows differently. "What felt like months to me had already become years for you. By the time I understood how to navigate between timelines without causing catastrophic disruptions, you had built a life defined by my absence. I couldn't simply reappear without risking everything you'd become." "So you manipulated my career path instead?" Eliza asked, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "Made sure I'd be in exactly the right place when Flight 612 returned?" "I left breadcrumbs," he admitted. "Small interventions at critical moments. A research grant approved here, a consulting opportunity there. But every choice was still yours, Eliza. I couldn't have guided you if the passion wasn't already there." Meanwhile, Captain Mercer's condition deteriorated rapidly as timeline resonance increased. His physical form occasionally became translucent as his quantum signature fluctuated between states of existence. During increasingly lucid moments, he revealed crucial details about the February event as experienced in his original timeline, a controlled demonstration of temporal isolation technology at a facility in the Pacific Northwest, marketed to military observers as the ultimate containment solution for biological or nuclear threats. "The sales pitch was perfect," he explained through episodes of Temporal Displacement, where his voice seemed to come from multiple locations simultaneously. "Imagine a storage facility where dangerous materials could be kept in a temporal bubble, aging at 1,000th the normal rate, monitoring systems that would last centuries, while only requiring monthly maintenance in real time." "But the demonstration went wrong," Eliza prompted. "Catastrophically wrong," Mercer confirmed, his form briefly stabilizing. "They created a temporal exclusion zone as planned, but didn't account for quantum entanglement between the isolated area and surrounding space-time. The zone began drawing energy from connected timeline branches, creating cascade failures that eventually collapsed multiple realities into a temporal war nobody could win. The converging crisis points forced a decisive moment when Robert activated equipment that projected a detailed temporal map across multiple displays, showing intersection points where all connected timelines aligned momentarily, creating windows where directed action in one timeline could affect all others simultaneously. "There are exactly 3 remaining alignment points before the February event," he explained, highlighting dates that corresponded to astronomical configurations. "Each represents an opportunity to close the breaches permanently by returning Flight 612 and its passengers to their original departure point in 1982. The implications of this solution hung heavy in the room. Returning the flight meant erasing its arrival in 2024, potentially altering the very timeline they currently occupied. More personally for Eliza, it meant choosing between keeping her newly found father in her life or allowing him to return to the temporal branch where his work continued. As the team debated these implications, alarm systems throughout the facility activated simultaneously. The anchorage rift had begun pulling matter through from multiple timeline branches, and the aircraft itself had started to phase in and out of conventional reality. "It's attempting to self-correct," Robert observed, studying the real-time data. "The plane exists simultaneously across multiple timelines, and the increasing instability is forcing quantum recalibration. It's trying to return to its point of origin naturally." "Then why not let it?" Dr. Salim asked. "Because without proper guidance, it could enter the temporal corridor at the wrong angle, creating even more breaches as it passes between timelines," Robert explained. "We need to ensure it returns precisely to July 7th, 1982, creating a closed loop that satisfies the quantum requirements. The proposed solution required precision timing that aligned with the next convergence point, a 16-minute window occurring in less than 36 hours, when all affected timelines briefly synchronized. This would create an opportunity for the aircraft to re-enter the temporal corridor with specific navigational parameters that would guide it back to its original departure point. The technical challenges were enormous, requiring modifications to the aircraft's systems that integrated technology from multiple timeline branches. More problematically, the calculations indicated that human pilots could not safely navigate the corridor due to the extreme temporal distortion effects on consciousness. The return journey must be automated, Robert explained, while programming guidance systems with Dr. Salim's assistance, with a temporal anchor point strong enough to maintain directional stability throughout the transition. This anchor point, they all realized, would have to be Anna, her unique quantum signature making her the ideal conductor for guiding the aircraft through the temporal corridor. The ethical implications created profound conflict for the entire team, particularly Eliza, who had developed a deep protective bond with the child. We're asking a 10-year-old girl to guide 92 people through a temporal corridor with no guarantee of safe arrival, she argued during the final planning session. There must be another way. There isn't, Anna said quietly, joining the conversation. I've always known this was why I came back, why all of us came back. She looked at Robert with understanding beyond her years. To close the circle, to make sure time keeps flowing the way it should. As preparations continued against the backdrop of escalating temporal disturbances, Eliza struggled with the personal implications of their imminent success. If they succeeded in returning Flight 612 to 1982, would she remember any of this? Would the connection she'd finally established with her father simply vanish, leaving her once again with only questions and no answers? The uncertainty of what tomorrow might bring lent a desperate intensity to their final hours of preparation. Whatever happened next would either save or destroy not just their timeline, but all connected realities across the temporal spectrum. With temporal disruptions accelerating across connected sites, the team relocated to the Anchorage facility, where Flight 612 had become the epicenter of converging timeline branches. The aircraft now existed in a state of quantum superposition, simultaneously present and absent, its physical structure occasionally becoming transparent as it shifted between states of reality. The passengers, grouped in the hangar under medical supervision, displayed the same phenomenological instability, their collective condition deteriorating as the temporal rift above the facility expanded to encompass the entire building. Agent Kim, faced with scientific evidence that contradicted every established protocol, finally acknowledged the validity of Robert Warren's warnings and authorized emergency measures to prepare the aircraft and passengers for potential temp. If your father is right about this cascade failure, Kim told Eliza as they watched technicians install modified guidance systems in the aircraft, we're facing something far beyond our containment capabilities. Our only option is to trust his approach, regardless of what it might mean for our timeline. The proposed solution required precision timing that aligned with the next convergence point, a 16-minute window where all affected timelines briefly synchronized, creating an opportunity for the aircraft to re-enter the temporal corridor with specific navigational parameters that would guide it back to its original 1982 departure point. The technical challenges were enormous, requiring modifications to the aircraft systems that integrated technology from multiple timeline branches. More problematically, the calculations indicated that human pilots could not safely navigate the corridor due to the extreme temporal distortion effects on consciousness. The return journey must be automated, Robert explained while programming guidance systems with Dr. Salim's assistance, with a temporal anchor point strong enough to maintain directional stability throughout the transition. Anna's role in the proceedings shifted from observer to central participant as monitoring equipment confirmed what Robert had suspected. Her unique quantum signature made her the ideal conductor for guiding the aircraft through the temporal corridor, She exists simultaneously across multiple timeline branches, he explained while showing Eliza readings that defied conventional understanding. Maintaining perfect coherence, regardless of temporal location, the ethical implications created profound conflict for the entire team, particularly Eliza, who had developed a deep protective bond with the child. We're asking a 10-year-old girl to guide 92 people through a temporal corridor with no guarantee of safe arrival, she argued during the final planning session. There must be another way. The turning point came unexpectedly from Captain Mercer, whose deteriorating condition had granted him unique insight into the temporal mechanics at play. During a moment of perfect lucidity between displacement episodes, he revealed that the temporal corridor naturally sought equilibrium, returning everything to its origin point unless actively redirected. The difficulty was never getting home, he explained, his voice steady despite his fluctuating physical presence. The challenge was staying away. Your father didn't remain in the corridor because he had to. He remained because he chose to understand it, rather than simply pass through it. This revelation transformed their understanding of the necessary approach, shifting focus from complex navigation to controlled release, allowing the natural properties of the corridor to draw the aircraft back to its origin point once properly introduced to the breach. As preparations reached their final stages, Eliza confronted the personal implications of their imminent success. The return of Flight 612 to 1982 would likely reset the timeline branch they currently occupied, potentially erasing the events of the past 8 months, including her reunion with her father. If we succeed, she asked him, during a brief private moment amid the controlled chaos of final preparations, will I remember any of this? Will you still be gone when I wake up tomorrow? Robert's answer offered neither false comfort nor absolute certainty. Time protects itself in ways we're only beginning to understand. But some connections transcend conventional temporal flow, the quantum entanglement between parent and child being perhaps the strongest. I believe you'll retain an echo of these events, perhaps as dreams or intuitions. And I promise you this, in every timeline branch where I exist, I will find ways to leave you signs that you're not alone. The final countdown to temporal alignment brought a strange calm to the Anchorage facility as preparations locked into their final configuration. Flight 612 sat on the runway, its engines running with a peculiar harmonic resonance that matched the frequency emissions from the rift overhead. The passengers had boarded in the same seat assignments they held in 1982, their personal belongings, frozen in time like they were, returned to their original locations. Captain Mercer, now existing more in the corridor than in conventional reality, sat in the pilot's seat as a quantum placeholder rather than an active controller, his physical form occasionally becoming completely transparent before re-solidifying. Anna waited in the first row, her small hands folded calmly in her lap, displaying none of the fear or uncertainty that permeated the adults around her. Eliza's final moments with her father occurred in the control tower overlooking the runway, surrounded by equipment that monitored the expanding rift as it aligned perfectly with the aircraft's projected takeoff path. In the original timeline, Flight 612 simply vanished during normal flight, Robert explained while making final adjustments to equipment that would help guide the plane into the corridor. Its return to 1982 will create a closed temporal loop. The passengers will experience nothing more unusual than unexpected turbulence before continuing to their original destination. Their brief journey through 2024 will become, at most, strange dreams that fade upon waking. The implications for their current timeline remained unclear. The mathematics suggested multiple possible outcomes, ranging from complete reset to the creation of a new branch where Flight 612 never reappeared in 2024. "What about you?" Eliza asked, unable to ignore the question any longer. "What happens to you when the loop closes?" "I'll continue my work from within the breach," Robert replied. There are other temporal anomalies that need monitoring, other potential cascade points that must be prevented. The breach network extends far beyond just our timeline. Eliza felt the familiar ache of impending loss. So I lose you all over again. Robert took her hands in his expression gentle but resolved. You found me once across 40 years and multiple timeline branches. That connection doesn't disappear just because we exist in different temporal planes. He pressed something small and metal into her palm. His watch, the one from the hidden chamber. Keep this with you. Time moves differently for it, just as it does for me. Watch for the moments when it runs backwards. Those are the points where our timelines briefly align. Outside, the rift had descended to meet the runway, its golden light bathing the entire airport in an otherworldly glow. The moment had come. Final systems checks confirmed all parameters were optimal for temporal transition. Flight 612 was ready for its journey home, back to 1982, completing a loop that had taken 42 years to close. As Robert activated the final sequence that would guide the aircraft into the corridor, he turned to Eliza one last time. Remember, no matter what happens next, what we've done here matters. Every choice, every connection we make ripples across all possible timelines. Nothing is ever truly lost, just experienced from different perspectives. The moment of departure arrived with unexpected grace. No dramatic acceleration or conventional takeoff, but a gradual fading as the aircraft taxied directly toward the shimmering distortion that had descended to meet the runway. Eliza watched through specialized lenses that rendered the temporal energies visible, witnessing the aircraft's gradual transition from solid matter to quantum potential as it entered the corridor. The last thing she saw clearly was Anna's face at the window, the child raising her hand in a gesture that somehow conveyed both farewell and promise. As the aircraft fully entered the breach, a pulse of golden light expanded outward in a perfect sphere, temporarily obscuring all visibility before collapsing back to a single point that winked out of existence, leaving only tire marks on the runway and a heat signature embedded in the concrete. The immediate aftermath brought the expected governmental response: containment, classification, and compartmentalization of all evidence related to Flight 612's impossible visit. Agent Kim oversaw the systematic dismantling of the research facility, ensuring all data was secured in deep archives, accessible only to those with the highest clearances. Dr. Salim was reassigned to a theoretical physics division, with no access to his previous findings. His research redirected toward conventional applications with careful oversight. The Lakhami Ridge facility was buried under an environmental disaster cover story, the entire area designated as restricted due to fictional contamination concerns. Eliza herself was debriefed extensively before being released with strict confidentiality agreements and subtle warnings about the consequences of breaking them. In the weeks that followed, she returned to her teaching position at the university, delivering lectures on historical aviation incidents with a perspective forever altered by first-hand knowledge of what truly happened to some of those mysterious disappearances. Her colleagues noticed a change in her, a certain peace that had replaced the driven obsession of her earlier research years, but attributed it to the extended research sabbatical she had supposedly taken. What most surprised Eliza was how quickly the world returned to normal, as though Flight 612's brief reappearance had been nothing more than a dream. News cycles moved on to other stories. Conspiracy theorists found new mysteries to obsess over, and the temporal disruptions that had threatened to collapse multiple realities faded from instruments worldwide. Only occasionally did she notice small anomalies, brief moments where time seemed to hiccup, or objects that momentarily appeared to exist in multiple states simultaneously. These incidents decreased in frequency as weeks turned into months, until even Eliza began to question her own memories of what had happened. The one constant reminder was her father's watch, which she wore daily, despite its peculiar behavior. Most of the time, it functioned normally, keeping perfect time like any quality timepiece. But once each hour, the second hand would jump backward 1 second for every 60 that passed, a subtle but undeniable reminder that her experience had been real, that somewhere beyond conventional reality, her father continued his work monitoring the boundaries between timelines. Sometimes, usually around dawn, the watch would briefly stop completely before resuming at a different time. Moments Eliza came to recognize as windows when the barriers between timelines grew temporarily thinner. 10 months after Flight 612's impossible arrival, Eliza stood alone in the now empty hangar where it all began, officially present to collect final personal items, but actually seeking closure that official processes could not provide. The concrete floor still bore the faint heat signature where the aircraft last touched solid ground before returning to its original timeline. As she knelt to place her hand against this last physical evidence, her father's watch began behaving strangely, the second hand spinning rapidly backward while the minute and hour hands remained still. When she looked up, the air 20 feet ahead shimmered momentarily with golden light, and for a fraction of a second, she saw what appeared to be a corridor stretching into infinite distance, where figures moved purposefully among technology she could not comprehend. Before the vision faded completely, she glimpsed her father, working alongside colleagues in what appeared to be a vast, temporal monitoring station. His expression focused but peaceful. The watch returned to normal function, except for a new inscription that had appeared on its back. "Time is not a line, but a web. Look for me in the connections." As Eliza left the facility for the final time, her attention was drawn to unusual air traffic patterns overhead. A commercial aircraft, modern, not decades old, requested emergency landing clearance, its pilot reporting instrument malfunctions and unexplained temporal readings. Government vehicles already moved with practiced efficiency toward the designated runway. As Eliza recognized the beginning of a pattern, she now understood better than anyone alive. When her phone rang with a familiar government agency number, she answered with newfound confidence, ready to step into the role her father had prepared her for across multiple timelines. "This is Dr. Warren," she stated calmly. "Yes, I'm already aware of the situation. I'll be there in 20 minutes. And this time, I know exactly what questions to ask." The drive back toward the airport gave Eliza time to reflect on everything that had changed in the past year. Her lifelong search for answers about her father's disappearance had led her through a journey she could never have imagined, only to bring her full circle to a new beginning. The mystery hadn't been solved so much as transformed into a deeper understanding, not just of what had happened to Flight 612 or her father, but of reality itself and her place within it. As she approached the airport perimeter, she noticed the familiar shimmer of temporal distortion beginning to form in the sky overhead, subtle enough that most would mistake it for unusual cloud formations or light refraction, but unmistakable to eyes that had seen it before. Her father's watch jumped backward again, more dramatically this time, as though responding to proximity. In her rearview mirror, Eliza caught a glimpse of a young girl standing by the roadside, perhaps 10 years old, with a backpack covered in colorful patches. Though she couldn't have been Anna, who had returned to 1982 with the flight, something in the child's knowing smile and deliberate wave triggered a flash of recognition. By the time Eliza had pulled over and looked back, the girl was gone, leaving only footprints in the roadside dust that seemed to appear from nowhere and lead nowhere. Continuing toward the airport where a new temporal event was clearly unfolding, Eliza felt neither fear nor uncertainty, but a profound sense of purpose. Whatever came through the breach today, whatever new impossible mystery arrived from beyond conventional understanding, she would be ready. Not just as the expert they would inevitably call, But as someone who understood that time was not the straight line most people perceived, but an intricate web of connections stretching across realities that occasionally, deliberately intersected. Her father had given her that understanding, not just through his research, but through his choices, which had rippled across decades to shape her life in ways she was only beginning to comprehend. As government vehicles converged on the runway ahead and her father's watch began to tick normally again, Eliza smiled at the realization that her journey hadn't ended with Flight 612's departure. It had only just begun.